The first thing I saw was my wife's wedding ring lying in the rain beneath a flickering alley light, and the second thing I heard was a police radio crackling beside her as she struggled to breathe. 3 uniformed officers stood over her. One was shouting into his radio. Another was looking around the alley, as if checking whether anyone had witnessed what happened. The third officer, Sergeant Daniel Mercer, was staring directly at me from 20 feet away. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know what I had done for the last 16 years. He didn't know that I had led a Green Beret team through places where hesitation could get everyone killed. And he certainly didn't know that the quiet man standing at the mouth of that alley had spent years learning how to control his breathing while his entire body screamed at him to move. My name is Ethan Cole. My wife is Rebecca. That night, she had gone to pick up medicine from a pharmacy 3 blocks from our home. She never made it back to the car. According to the official report, 3 officers had encountered her during a routine patrol and claimed she became uncooperative. But the scene in front of me looked nothing like a routine stop. Rebecca's coat was torn, her cheek was swollen, her hands were trembling so badly that she couldn't hold them still. Her wedding ring had come off when someone grabbed her arm, and it had landed in a puddle beside a storm drain. I recognized it instantly because I had placed it on her finger 12 years earlier. I took one step forward. Mercer raised a hand. "Stay back." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I looked at his badge, then at Officers Ryan Cole and Travis Bell. I memorized their faces. I memorized their positions. I memorized the location of every camera I could see. My military training didn't disappear because I was standing in civilian clothes. It became quieter, colder. I called Rebecca's name. Her eyes found mine. "Ethan," she whispered. That one word nearly broke me. I wanted to run to her, but I forced myself to wait for the paramedics. I knew the difference between protecting someone and making a dangerous situation worse. What I didn't know yet was that the 3 officers had already decided what story they were going to tell. They said Rebecca had resisted. They said she had become aggressive. They said there had been a misunderstanding. They said they had acted according to procedure, but there was one problem with their story. I could see the security camera mounted above the pharmacy entrance. Its red indicator was blinking. Somebody had recorded the entire encounter. And when I looked at Mercer, I realized something that chilled me more than the rain. He knew about the camera too, yet he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at me, as if he was trying to figure out whether I was dangerous. He had no idea that the real danger wasn't what I might do. It was what I was about to uncover. At the hospital, fluorescent lights turned everything pale and unreal. Rebecca lay beneath a thin blanket while a nurse named Carla Jennings checked her vital signs. I sat beside her without saying much. My hands were clasped together so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. Carla noticed. "You can breathe," she said quietly. "She's here. She's safe." I nodded, but my mind was still in that alley. The smell of wet pavement, the sound of radios, the way Mercer had looked at the camera, the way Bell had avoided my eyes, the way Ryan Cole had quietly told another officer, "Make sure the report matches." That sentence had been almost inaudible beneath the rain, but I had heard it. Rebecca eventually told me what she remembered. She didn't want to repeat everything. I didn't make her. She said the officers had stopped her near the pharmacy and demanded identification. She gave it to them. Then they accused her of lying about where she had been. When she asked why she was being detained, one officer grabbed her arm. She protested. The situation escalated. She remembered being pushed against the wall and falling. After that, her memory became fragmented. She remembered voices, boots, a radio, someone telling her to stop resisting. Then she remembered seeing me. I told her she didn't need to say anything else. She looked at me and asked, "Are you angry?" I didn't answer immediately. "Yes," I finally said, "but I'm more focused on getting you through this." She squeezed my hand. That was when I made myself a promise. Whatever happened next would be about Rebecca's safety and the truth, not about satisfying my anger. The next morning, Detective Sarah Bennett arrived at the hospital. She was assigned to investigate the officers. She introduced herself carefully and said she had requested all available body camera footage. I watched her expression change when she checked her tablet. "There are gaps," she said. "How large?" I asked. "Almost 20 minutes. I looked at her. 3 officers, 3 body cameras, 20 minutes missing. She nodded. "That's the problem." I told her about the pharmacy camera. She said she would subpoena the footage. 2 hours later, the pharmacy owner, Martin Alvarez, called me. He had already reviewed the recording. He said the camera captured the beginning of the encounter, but the view was partially blocked by a delivery truck. Still, he had another camera facing the alley. That camera showed something important. The officers had taken Rebecca away from the visible street and into a darker section of the alley. They had then remained there for several minutes. Martin sounded nervous. "Mr. Cole, I don't want trouble." I told him I understood. He said he would preserve the recording. That afternoon, Sarah called me. Her voice had changed. "Ethan, I need you to listen carefully. Don't contact those officers. Don't confront them. Don't threaten them." I told her I hadn't planned to. She paused. "Someone has already accessed the evidence system." My stomach tightened. Who? She didn't know yet, but the timing was too perfect. Someone inside the department had learned that an independent detective was investigating, and suddenly, I understood that the alley was only the beginning. The question wasn't just what 3 officers had done to my wife. It was who was prepared to protect them. I spent the next 48 hours doing something I had learned to do long before I ever wore a Green Beret insignia. I built a timeline. Every minute mattered. Every contradiction mattered. Every missing record mattered. Sarah Bennett gave me no confidential information, and I respected that. Instead, I hired attorney Michael Grant, a former federal prosecutor who understood how quickly local investigations could become compromised. Michael told me to document everything without contacting witnesses directly. We followed his advice. Martin preserved the pharmacy footage. Carla preserved the hospital intake records. Rebecca's medical documentation was secured through her attorney. Meanwhile, Sarah requested the officers' body camera files again. This time, the department claimed the cameras had malfunctioned. All 3 of them, on the same night, during the same 20-minute period. Michael almost laughed when he heard that. "That's not a malfunction," he said. "That's a story." I didn't smile. Stories could destroy people when the wrong person controlled the evidence. Sarah eventually obtained a technical report showing the cameras had not malfunctioned. They had been manually disabled. Someone had entered an override code. The code belonged to Sergeant Daniel Mercer. That changed everything. Mercer was no longer simply an officer accused of misconduct. He was now connected to the destruction of evidence. But before Sarah could arrest anyone, the department's chief, Harold Voss, announced that the investigation had found no immediate evidence of criminal wrongdoing. I watched the press conference from my living room. Chief Voss stood behind a podium and spoke about professionalism, transparency, and protecting public trust. He never mentioned the missing footage. He never mentioned the pharmacy camera. He never mentioned the override code. Rebecca watched beside me. "They don't believe me," she said. I turned toward her. "They believe what they want people to believe." She looked down. "What's the difference?" I answered. "The truth doesn't need permission." That night, Michael received an encrypted file from an unknown sender. Inside was a copy of the original camera system log. It showed something the official report had omitted. The body cameras had been disabled at 11:43 p.m. They had been reactivated at 12:02, but at 11:51, one of the cameras briefly transmitted a corrupted audio fragment to the department server. The fragment lasted only 9 seconds. Michael sent it to an independent forensic lab. The technicians cleaned the audio without altering its content. What emerged was barely understandable, but one sentence could be heard clearly. "Nobody is going to believe her." The voice belonged to Mercer. Another voice replied, "Make sure the report says resistance." That second voice belonged to Officer Travis Bell. I listened once, then again, I felt something inside me become very still. Rebecca was sitting across the room. I didn't tell her the details immediately. She had already been forced to relive enough. Instead, I told Michael to give everything to Sarah Bennett. Sarah listened to the recording and went silent. Then she said, "This is enough to request outside jurisdiction." The case was transferred to the state attorney general's office. Suddenly, Mercer and his 2 officers were no longer being investigated by their colleagues. Independent investigators arrived. Federal civil rights attorneys were notified. The department's internal system was frozen. And then something unexpected happened. Officer Ryan Cole requested an attorney. He also requested immunity. That meant he was ready to talk. But why would one of the 3 officers suddenly turn on the others? The answer came the next morning when his attorney delivered a statement. Cole claimed Mercer had ordered the cover-up. He said Chief Voss knew about it, and he named a fourth person who had been present during the planning meeting. That person was Deputy Chief Alan Pierce. The corruption was no longer 3 officers deep, it had reached the top. Ryan Cole's statement opened a door nobody in the department wanted opened. He admitted that Mercer had ordered the body cameras disabled and that Travis Bell had been instructed to write the initial report. Cole claimed he had objected but had been threatened with suspension. Investigators verified several parts of his story through phone records and access logs. More importantly, they discovered that Chief Voss had received a message from Mercer 12 minutes after the encounter. The message contained 3 words. Handled, need cover. Voss replied, understood. That exchange was enough to trigger a formal criminal investigation. But the deeper investigators went, the more disturbing the picture became. Mercer wasn't acting alone. There were previous complaints against him. 5 civilians had accused him of unnecessary force over the previous 3 years. Every complaint had been closed without discipline. One complainant had been pressured into signing a statement saying she did not wish to continue. Another had discovered that her original complaint had disappeared from the department system. Sarah Bennett found the pattern. She also found that Deputy Chief Pierce had personally reviewed every complaint. This wasn't one bad night. It was a culture of protection. Rebecca was not the first person harmed by it. She was simply the case that finally produced evidence strong enough to break the wall. I met Sarah outside the state investigative office. She looked exhausted. Ethan, I want you to know something, she said. Your wife's case has changed the entire investigation. I asked what she meant. She said investigators were now reviewing more than 24 incidents involving the same officers and supervisors. Some involved excessive force, others involved false reports, several involved evidence discrepancies. I thought about Rebecca. Her pain had exposed something much larger than our family, but I also knew that she didn't want to become a symbol. She wanted to be treated like a person. When I returned home, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She asked whether there had been progress. I told her the truth. Yes, they're investigating the whole department. She looked at me. Does that mean they'll punish everyone? I said. Only if the evidence proves they were involved. She nodded. Good. I asked why. She answered, because I don't want innocent people punished just because they wear the same uniform. That sentence stopped me. She still had compassion for people who wore the same uniform as the men who had hurt her. It reminded me why I had to stay disciplined. We weren't fighting a uniform, we were fighting abuse of power. Meanwhile, investigators obtained a warrant for the department's internal communications. They discovered messages between Mercer and Pierce discussing problem civilians. They found references to complaint management, report adjustments, and evidence handling. One message was especially revealing. Mercer wrote, "If we protect the report protects us." Pierce replied, "That's how this place survives." The investigators stared at those words for a long time. So did I. They weren't describing law enforcement. They were describing a machine designed to protect itself. The question now was how many people would be willing to testify against that machine. Then another officer came forward. Her name was Melissa Hart. She had served in the department for 9 years. She said she had watched supervisors manipulate complaints and discourage officers from documenting misconduct. She had kept copies of internal memos because she knew someday someone might need them. Her evidence included a directive from Chief Voss ordering officers to maintain narrative consistency when multiple reports concerned the same incident. The phrase sounded bureaucratic. In context, it was devastating. The narrative had been chosen before the facts were known, and Rebecca's story had been rewritten before anyone bothered to hear it. The trial began 7 months after the night in the alley. By then, Rebecca had recovered physically, but emotional scars remained. She had started counseling with Dr. Naomi Foster, who helped her understand that healing was not a straight line. Some mornings were normal, others were difficult. Certain sounds triggered memories. Police sirens could make her shoulders tense. Dark alleys were places she avoided. But she had also begun volunteering with a community legal organization that helped people understand their rights during encounters with authorities. She never wanted another person to feel as powerless as she had. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Mercer sat at the defense table between his attorneys. Bell sat beside him. Pierce was charged separately but was present for preliminary proceedings. Chief Voss had already resigned. Ryan Cole had accepted a cooperation agreement in exchange for truthful testimony. When Cole took the stand, the room became silent. He described the night in detail without exaggerating. He admitted his own role. He admitted writing false portions of the report. He admitted he had been afraid. The prosecutor asked why he had finally spoken. Cole looked toward Rebecca. Because I realized being afraid wasn't an excuse forever. Rebecca didn't look away. Then the prosecution played the 9-second audio recording. Mercer saying nobody would believe her. Bell responding that the report should say resistance. The courtroom seemed to shrink. I felt Rebecca's hand tighten around mine. I whispered, "You don't have to look." She whispered back, "I want to." The audio ended. Nobody spoke. Then the prosecutor displayed the technical evidence showing the cameras had been intentionally disabled. The defense argued that the recording was incomplete and the circumstances were misunderstood. But the evidence kept arriving. Phone records, access logs, internal messages, previous complaints, financial records, testimony from Melissa Hart, testimony from Ryan Cole, testimony from the pharmacy owner, medical records. The defense tried to portray the investigation as an attack on the department. That argument might have worked months earlier. It didn't work now. The state wasn't attacking the department. It was separating the institution from the people who had abused it. During closing arguments, the prosecutor said something I will never forget. A badge does not make a person incapable of wrongdoing. It makes accountability more important. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On the third morning, the verdicts arrived. Mercer was found guilty of assault, obstruction, evidence tampering, and official misconduct. Bell was convicted of conspiracy, obstruction, and falsifying records. Pierce was convicted on corruption-related charges after a separate proceeding. Chief Voss pleaded guilty to misconduct and evidence-related charges. Ryan Cole received a reduced sentence because of his cooperation, but he still faced consequences for his own actions. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read. Rebecca closed her eyes. She didn't celebrate. She simply breathed. Afterward, reporters surrounded us outside. Microphones appeared. Cameras flashed. One journalist asked me whether I was satisfied. I looked at Rebecca before answering. I'm relieved that the truth was heard. Another reporter asked whether my military background had helped. I said, it taught me discipline, but this wasn't won by military tactics. It was won by evidence, witnesses, attorneys, investigators, and my wife's courage. Rebecca later told me she appreciated that answer. I didn't want people thinking you came to destroy them, she said. I wanted them to understand that I survived them. That became the sentence I remembered most. She hadn't survived because someone stronger came along. She survived because she endured long enough for the truth to become undeniable. The department changed after the trial. Independent oversight became mandatory for serious misconduct complaints. Body camera systems were redesigned so officers could not independently erase footage. Evidence access was logged in real time. Complaints were reviewed outside the chain of command. A civilian oversight board was created. Some officers resigned. Others retired. Several stayed and helped rebuild trust. Sergeant Angela Morris became interim chief and publicly apologized to Rebecca and the other victims whose complaints had been ignored. She didn't make excuses. She said the department had failed people and needed to earn their trust again. Rebecca accepted the apology without pretending it erased the past. She told Chief Morris, "An apology matters when it becomes a change." That sentence became part of the department's new training program. My military career had taught me that teams fail when leaders protect bad decisions instead of correcting them. The same principle applied here. A team doesn't become stronger by hiding mistakes. It becomes stronger by confronting them. I eventually met with several officers who had remained silent during the misconduct. Some were ashamed. Some said they had feared losing their jobs. I understood fear, but I also understood responsibility. I told them that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's making the right decision while fear is present. Rebecca's recovery continued. She returned to work part-time, then full-time. She started walking in the park again. She drove past the pharmacy again. The first time she walked through that alley with me, she stopped at the entrance. I asked whether she wanted to turn around. She shook her head. We stood there together. The rain had stopped. Sunlight touched the pavement. The place looked ordinary. That almost made it harder to believe what had happened there. Rebecca looked down at the ground. This place doesn't own me anymore, she said. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She took my hand and kept walking. That was the moment I understood the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge keeps you staring backward. Justice allows you to turn around and keep walking. I had spent months thinking about the men who had hurt my wife. I had imagined what I would say if I ever stood in front of them. In the end, I said almost nothing. The courtroom had already spoken. The evidence had already spoken. Rebecca had spoken. Their own messages had spoken. Their own recordings had spoken. I didn't need to add anger to a record that was already complete. One evening, months later, Rebecca asked me whether I regretted not confronting Mercer that first night. I told her no. She asked why. I said, because I wanted the truth to survive me. She looked at me for a moment. That's a strange answer, I smiled. It's a military answer. She laughed for the first time that week. That laugh was worth more than any punishment Mercer could receive. Our marriage had changed too. We became more careful about checking on each other, more willing to talk about difficult things, less likely to assume that silence meant someone was okay. I realized that strength isn't always standing between your family and danger. Sometimes it's sitting beside someone who is hurting and allowing them to decide what they need. Sometimes it's knowing when to speak and when to listen. Sometimes it's refusing to become the person your enemy expects you to become. Mercer expected anger. He expected intimidation. He expected me to use my training recklessly. Instead, I used discipline. That frustrated him more than anything. He wanted a confrontation because confrontation creates confusion. Confusion creates opportunities. But there was nowhere for him to hide once the evidence was organized. Every contradiction became another piece. Every missing record became another question. Every message became another link. The truth didn't arrive like lightning. It arrived like pressure, slowly increasing until the structure could no longer withstand it. 2 years later, Rebecca and I returned to the pharmacy where everything had begun. Martin Alvarez recognized us immediately. He had kept the original security footage preserved throughout the investigation. We thanked him. He waved us off. I only did what I thought was right. I told him that was exactly why it mattered. Ordinary people sometimes imagine that courage belongs to soldiers, police officers, judges, or politicians. It doesn't. Courage can belong to a pharmacist who refuses to erase a recording, a nurse who documents injuries accurately, an officer who finally speaks, a detective who refuses to accept a convenient story, an attorney who keeps asking questions, a wife who chooses to testify even when her voice shakes. Those people changed our story. My Green Beret background didn't make me invincible. It simply taught me how to function when everything inside me wanted to react. I had spent years learning that the loudest person in a crisis is rarely the most useful. The calmest person often sees the most. That lesson saved me that night. If I had attacked those officers, the investigation could have disappeared under a new headline. I could have become the story. Rebecca's suffering could have been buried beneath accusations against me. Instead, we kept the focus where it belonged, on evidence, on accountability, on her voice. There were still people who criticized us. Some said I should have handled things differently. Some said Rebecca should have stayed home. Some defended the officers because they believed police should always be trusted. I learned not to argue with everyone. The truth doesn't become more true because everyone agrees with it. What mattered was that the evidence could withstand scrutiny. It did. One afternoon, I received a letter from Sergeant Angela Morris. She wrote that the department had completed reforms and that the number of unresolved misconduct complaints had fallen because independent review was catching cases earlier. She thanked Rebecca for helping force those changes. Rebecca read the letter and said, "I never wanted any of this." I told her I knew, but maybe something good can still come from something terrible. She nodded. Maybe. That was enough. We didn't romanticize what happened. We didn't pretend the pain was necessary. We didn't call it a blessing. Some things are simply wrong. The good comes from what people choose to do afterward. Years passed. The city changed. New officers joined the department who had never heard Mercer's name except during training. New policies became normal. Body cameras stayed active. Complaint systems became independent. The alley became just another street. Rebecca eventually stopped thinking about it every day, then every week, then sometimes only when someone mentioned the case. Healing had become less about forgetting and more about reclaiming ordinary moments. One evening, we were sitting on our porch when she looked at me and said, "Do you remember the ring?" I knew exactly which one she meant. Yes, She held up her hand. The same ring was there, repaired, polished, still hers. She smiled. I thought I lost it forever, I said. So did I. She shook her head. You found it. I corrected her. You found it. We both laughed. The truth was, we had both found something that night. Not revenge. Not victory in the way movies portray it. We found the determination to refuse the version of reality someone else tried to force on us. The officers wanted the story to be simple. She resisted, they acted, case closed. But reality was more complicated. Reality contained fear, pain, evidence, courage, corruption, accountability, and eventually healing. The people who tried to control the narrative learned that truth becomes dangerous when enough people preserve it. And I learned something too. Being a Green Beret team leader taught me how to protect people under pressure. Being Rebecca's husband taught me something harder. Sometimes protecting someone means standing beside them while they find their own strength. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait, document, listen, and refuse to let rage make your decisions. That night in the alley could have become the worst night of our lives. Instead, it became the beginning of a fight that exposed a system built to protect itself. The officers thought they were dealing with a frightened woman and an angry husband. They were wrong. They were dealing with a woman who refused to disappear, a family that refused to be intimidated, investigators who refused to stop asking questions, and evidence that refused to stay buried. I still remember the rain. I remember the alley light. I remember seeing Rebecca's ring on the pavement and feeling something inside me go completely silent. At that moment, I didn't know whether the people responsible would ever be held accountable. I didn't know whether the department would protect them. I didn't know whether the system would believe my wife, but I knew one thing. I would not let fear make my decisions. That became the foundation for everything that followed. We didn't hunt anyone down. We didn't destroy anyone's life outside the law. We didn't turn a terrible crime into another act of violence. We collected facts. We protected evidence. We found people willing to speak. We trusted investigators who earned that trust. And when the evidence was strong enough, we let the courts do what courts are supposed to do. The men who thought a badge could shield them discovered that a badge cannot erase a recording. It cannot rewrite a timestamp. It cannot delete every witness. It cannot make an injured person disappear. And it cannot control what happens when honest people finally compare the facts. Rebecca's story changed my understanding of strength. I used to think strength meant being prepared to act immediately. Now I know strength can mean knowing when not to act. My military training taught me to control the battlefield. My marriage taught me that some battles cannot be controlled. You can only control your response. You can control whether you become consumed by hatred. You can control whether you protect the person you love or make the situation about yourself. You can control whether you tell the truth when lying would be easier. You can control whether you walk away from revenge even when revenge feels justified. Rebecca did not need me to become a weapon. She needed me to remain her husband. That distinction saved both of us. Years after the trial, she asked me whether I would change anything if I could go back. I thought about it for a long time. I would have listened more carefully when you first said something felt wrong. She nodded. That's what I would change too. We sat together in silence. There was no dramatic music. No courtroom, no flashing cameras, just two people who had survived something painful and were still choosing each other. That was the victory. Not that 3 corrupt officers lost their jobs. Not that supervisors went to prison. Not that a police department changed its policies. Those things mattered. But the deepest victory was that Rebecca's future wasn't defined by what those men did. She had her laugh back. She had her confidence back. She had her ordinary mornings back. She could walk through a dark street without believing every shadow contained danger, and I could finally look at that alley without feeling the old pressure in my chest. The story began with a ring in the rain. It ended with that same ring shining in the sunlight. That is what justice gave us. Not a perfect ending, a future. If there is one lesson I carry from that night, it is this. Never confuse restraint with weakness. Restraint can be the hardest form of strength. When someone tries to provoke you into becoming the villain, refusing the invitation can be more powerful than any confrontation. The corrupt officers wanted a fight they could control. We gave them evidence they couldn't escape. They wanted silence. Rebecca spoke. They wanted confusion. We built a timeline. They wanted missing records. Investigators recovered backups. They wanted people afraid. Someone finally chose courage, and they wanted the story to end in an alley. It didn't. It continued into a courtroom, into policy reforms, into a healing process, and into the rest of Rebecca's life. That's the ending I wanted from the beginning. Not because I stopped being angry, but because I learned anger doesn't deserve to decide the future. Rebecca deserved that future. She earned it. And every morning she wakes up and lives it. The people who tried to take it from her lose a little more of the power they once believed they had. Where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below. What kind of story do you want next? Military revenge, psychological thriller, or emotional family justice? And here's the moral question I want you to answer honestly. If you were in my shoes and discovered that 3 officers had assaulted your wife and then tried to erase the evidence, would you have waited for the legal system to expose them, or would your anger have pushed you toward taking justice into your own hands? Think about it before you answer, because sometimes the hardest form of justice is refusing to become the person who hurt you. Thank you for listening. Stay strong, protect the people you love, and remember that courage isn't always about fighting back. Sometimes it's about standing firm long enough for the truth to win. I'll see you in the next story.
टोक्यो क्या कर रही हो? टोक्यो टोक्यो टोक्यो
पहले सही था। हाँ बंद हो जाता बार बार 10 मिनट बाद 20 मिनट बाद ऑटोमेटिकली बंद हो रहा है। ये उधर वो बोला नहीं। अब तो बहुत चेंज हो गया ऐसे यार।
टोक्यो
वो सेट तो चेक